We didn't have a lot of time at the end of class yesterday to take questions. There seemed to be a number of people who had questions, so we'll start with questions. Anybody?
Can Rinpoche recommend for those of us that commentary to Gelson J's words that might kind of be simple, not more complicated?
Any progetto Shinken Sola, any number about the Java. Those you those go lao do you out of it. You're not.
You go up with that. Nowadays, so we are got it. That may be and that was maybe in another chief teacher. Make us Namdi, we need the young kind of science, and the Yaris, the Yaris, T-shirt, the Yaris.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, it is
So Rinpoche recommends, in particular, a work by a scholar that was mentioned earlier, Tenna Paramba. He has so that he has a text that is not so much a commentary of the words of the root text, the second chapter, but it's sort of an overview, and it's a very good analysis of the key topics and how they should be understood. It's available in digital form. If people are interested, you can ask perhaps Gyumed can help you find it. So in his work, this particular work, he addresses 5 main topics. The first one is the kind of reasoning that's presented in the chapter, but it just talks about the reasoning itself. That's used to establish the validity of the spiritual authority of the master, the Buddha. So that's really the kind of the overarching subject of the chapter, which is to explain. The chapter starts by explaining the epithet of being and what it means to say the Buddha became a spiritual authority. And then there are the remaining 4 epithets that are presented in the original order or the forward order. And that is one way of proving the possibility and the reasonableness of saying that the Buddha is, in fact, an enlightened person who is therefore supreme spiritual authority. From the point of view of the causes, right, meaning the attitude and practice, those two qualities. And then there's the reverse, or the opposite discussed in the reverse order, and then that in the reverse order, the Four Noble Truths are discussed extensively, and then they become the kind of the elements of that prove through which make known by the fact that the Buddha taught such an extraordinary teaching that only someone who is a spiritual authority could have done so, knowing in that way. It works in reverse order. So those are eight points, and each one of them is addressed by as a specific reason, and then talks about them in his own language. So that's the first one. Second point is then specifically how the Four Noble Truths can be understood in terms of arguments. What are the arguments that prove the correctness of the doctrine of the Four Noble Truths? Dambashi means what's the reasoning that can establish their validity? Then, actually, these 5 points are what we've been following here, right? So the third one is then reasoning that establishes truthfulness of the ultimate goal, called highest good, or melek, and specifically of the two, then the first form of highest good is liberation itself, right? And so that's addressed. How do we talk about that? I think yesterday, and and then so it says that the element of logic that proves the highest good in reference to Buddhahood, that really comes under the subject matter of the first topic, which is to say that there are two principal causes, the excellent attitude, the excellent form of practice, that can be cultivated continually over many lifetimes and culminate in the epithets of being Sugata and being a savior and capable of teaching the knowledge that he's okay. So that's part of the main topic of the highest good or ultimate goal of Buddhism is a valid claim that there is such a thing. And then the second one was the temporary goal of the higher realms of existence, and that's what we talked about yesterday afternoon, right? And then the final one, the fifth one, is then the Buddha's teaching, right? And the two aspects of Buddha's teaching are the scriptural teaching and the teaching that is attained, or the teaching in the form of knowledge of practicing the scriptural teaching. So that's the presentation that's explaining the meaning of what the whole chapter is about.
진발했던 이유들이 다 때문에 아니 어느 정도 그만 가르쳐 주빙수나 이런 근데 아니 그 상부 이야기 가르쳐서는 아니 서가 공부했던 이유들이 있어. 어찌다 서가기 제베레 사지 제베티 스웨데고 그걸 상부 이야기 스웨데기 어디 이산이 모두 그런 티처 모두 유스는 그런 티처 어디 모두 동시에가 저희는 동시에가 모두 동시에가 모두 동시에가 동시에야 이 그게 기본 농주야 이 주식이 그래 저희들과 근데 그 저희들 땅나라 집과 땅을 들이 저희들은 농주야 될 농주야 될 이 나라들 네 예치다 그 집과 땅을 수수 집과 땅을 들이 수수 저희들은 농주기 해야지 네 농주지 농주 줘야 될 가능성은 되게 있지. 그것이 그런 뒤에야 농주기를 이유가 저게 이해를 받지다. 스스로 농주기가 이해하고 온갖 이해를 받. 어디 세상이 또 바람도 길이 있어. 어디 이상 농주세. tadi kalau sambung yang di Surabaya punya, Surabaya punya. Ada sini kondu sabar di sana, kalau sambung yang ada, orang di kalau sambung di sana, ada sini di sehingga untuk kerja lihat, lihat di Surabaya itu cuma Surabaya jadi di Indonesia ada di Indonesia di
So went back to the fourth topic, the topic about elevated status or higher realms rebirth being the temporary goal, temporary proper goal or something that's positive as a goal. And generally it refers to rebirth as a human being or as a worldly god. And there were three elements of that status. So the ability to experience prosperity, to have access to resources, literally objects of enjoyment, and to have the capacity to enjoy them, something that is determined by our karma and is associated with the practice of generosity. And had the opportunity to add a point that what you mentioned yesterday that I left out, which was that there are examples of beings that are nagas, for instance, are not human beings. They're classified as the class of animals or at least sometimes powerful spirits, but anyway, they're a lower realm rebirth. And yet they are identified in some cases as being extremely prosperous. They have access to great wealth, described. So they're an example of beings who created the causes for one element of a higher realm's existence, but not the principal one. The principal one is that one has to have engaged in morality. So morality is the principal cause for achieving the form of existence. And if you add Lu means the body, literally, but it's referring to existence as a human being or as a worldly God. So it's not enough to practice generosity, you have to practice morality to gain that form of existence, form of rebirth, desirable rebirth. And then third element of higher status or birth, temporary goal of attaining higher status is then also to have a wide circle. That word circle can have a number of meanings. So in one sense, as a Mahayanist, you need to be able to draw other people, bring people to the Dharma and have them want to follow the Dharma, and you become the focus for bringing that about by your own traits. And so patience is an essential quality that can contribute to that. In addition to being a cause that's identified as producing physical, good physical features, attractive physical features, which also are appealing to other people. It also means that a person who has a peaceful nature is more inclined or more capable, or typically is one who other people will be more willing to associate with. And so the more people that associate with you, the larger your so-called circle. And so then that's sort of a social dimension of one's life that have that in a number of different ways have an important role to play in your own, spiritual efforts. So patience then is also included as one of the three elements of a higher status, rebirth in higher realms, rebirth. So then also in relation to the first one of having prosperity, then the prosperity is the emphasis not so much on the fact that your karma produces prosperity. Prosperity means the objects that are enjoyed, the objects of enjoyment, the resources that they may be abundant in the environment that you live, but you may not have access to, may not be accessible to you. You may not have the opportunity to resort to them and actually enjoy them. And it's that quality of having karmically created the condition which makes it easy for you to have access to resources and to be able to make use of them. So
제로 단지 이제 치명도 상도 되게 그때나 수빈 남자 가사도 취재했어요. 네. 지금 문도 중인데 아니 수빈 남자 지금 양의 주신 제가 가사인데 어쨌든 수빈 남자 가사도 취재했어요. 지금은 문도 그간 중인데 중인데 근데 지금 주신 분이 이것도 그래가 하지만 지금은 문도 그렇게 조심하 아직 좀 생각하는데 되게 지금 문도 가서 문도 이렇게 없어야 되기까지 집에 문제 친구들이 있어야 문제지 나게 된게 좀 이제 제수에 가는 일에 빌레트는 그거지 집에들아 일이 그거다 어디에서 들어주는 게 누지 개배 주세요 어디 제산다 어디 제수에 가는 민주가 하시나
이런 기준 보고 말했을 때 왜?
당연도
Right. So if you
이 지명 원주디 신고들과 지다 사람 세지도 지명 원주던 모두 계획에 불러 순발라 시작을 시작을 이 문에 순간에 시작을 계획을 한 말이지 불러 신동지 저들이 시작을 해서
시작을 해서는 어떤 그렇게
모두 이제 듣는 이게 안 나와 신고들이 제가 지금 대선 단계들이 다른 세계는 문두담 무시하지 문두담 무시하지 문두담 무시하지
So we're talking about this topic of the higher status, right? One by talk, and as was presented yesterday. So it was described yesterday as saying this is a subject that is a form, an object of knowledge which is extremely hidden in that we cannot verify, we cannot comprehend for ourselves all of the intricacies of how generosity, morality, and patience in particular, and in a specific way, what the exact nature of their results will be, and the general principle that those elements, those virtues will ensure the attainment of higher status is something that we need to rely upon the flawless speech of the Buddha that we determine to be flawless by those three forms of analysis. And that's how, and we infer the cause and effect relationship that brings about higher status on the basis of scriptural authority. Unlike the nature of the Four Noble Truths that we can determine on the basis of the more conventional form of inference. I can't remember the exact translation of that particular type of inference, but it means like inference from experience. And we discussed that yesterday. That all should be something that you remember hearing about yesterday. So then the point is made that in I thought I heard everybody say Rinpoche's commentary, but then later it sounded like he said he gets up his commentary. But anyway, one of the two principal Galupa commentaries on the Pramanavarttika, there is a statement which says that one taught some means it's a kind of primitive particle. It means just the quality of being a higher status. So I take that to mean without any specificity. So the quality of being able to achieve higher status is suggested in one of these commentaries, can be established on the basis of regular form of inference, shall we say, rather than an inference based on scriptural authority. So that seems to be at odds with the whole explanation that we were talking about yesterday, that the subject matter of higher status is something that's considered to be epistemically an extremely hidden object that we cannot verify through ordinary reason. So then in the commentary, he says, basically that statement, right, which is found in the commentary, sort of is, not the word, I don't want to say problematic, but it is something that is not, maybe he doesn't explain it at length, why he describes that, why he makes that statement, that sort of an unqualified form of higher status can be established on the basis of reasoning. And then Rinpoche said what that means is, for example, we could make the argument as follows. The person who is endowed with pure morality, that person in his or her future life is, we can assert, it is appropriate to assert, suggesting that it is a definite thing, that he or she will be reborn in a form of higher status, in that sense of an unqualified form of higher status, some form of higher status. And then that's the predicate of the thesis. And the reason is because that individual is someone who has cultivated in their life a pure form of morality. And so that's meant to be an actual inference, an argument, an inferential argument, which is meant to be thought of as capable of proving that the person will be born in the future in a higher realm rebirth. So that, if that's true, and it's based on what that kind of brief assertion is found in the Pramanavarttika commentary, that seems to be at odds with the general principle that the topic of the higher realm status can only be verified on the basis of scriptural authority. So this is something that requires further analysis to understand exactly what that author of that commentary, was, how he meant that statement. Because the general principle is widely followed that we can establish that the Buddha is infallible in having taught the Four Noble Truths as a way of proving the highest good, proving the ability to achieve nirvana. And that we can verify that on the basis of reason. And that's the principal aim of Buddhism. That's the principal goal. That's the most important goal that the Buddha taught about. So he taught about a secondary goal or a lesser goal of higher status, and we can reliably believe what the Buddha said about that on the basis of that other kind of inference, which relies on scriptural authority. And then the concordant example that was given is, for example, in the way that we can establish the truthfulness of the highest good. So that way of presentation is relying on scriptural authority. That argument is kind of the generally accepted point of view of what the Pramanavarttika is teaching is the latter. So then that particular passage which suggests that you can infer future life, rebirth as being a favorable rebirth. How is that meant to be understood? Is that like that?
맞아들이다. 먼저 담들이 배도 사제. 먼저 제브르제다. 두 말에 이제 재미나 먼저 담 스테트나 먼저 담 먼저 되게 배불라 시도다. 먼저 제브르제디 먼저 되게 말이 스타트 분지야 가는 자가 됐으나 이게 지가 강사 지가 수준 순간에 제 다시 투하했지. 제가 진지 대배 지금나 분들이 당장이 말이 가서 모두 그렇게 말이.
So then Rinpoche sort of goes back and says, well, probably the way to understand these two seemingly conflicting ideas is that the statement by the commentator is saying that you can infer by reasoning, by ordinary reasoning, that in a non-specific way, that certain kinds of causal activities will ensure a higher realm rebirth. But Monto Zang means only in the general sense of being a higher form of existence, but without any specificity. Kyebarjin means a higher realm birth, which has we cannot infer, for instance, cannot infer where particularly we will be born, in exactly what family we will be reborn, and what sort of qualities of prosperity we may enjoy. That we can determine by reason. That specificity of the higher realm rebirth, I believe, is what is extremely hidden. And so whatever we can determine about our future existence is largely dependent upon scriptural authority.
That and the conclusion would be is that 아니 벌써 투어를 내 요한을 뭉쳐버티 신을 것들이 있어요. 그 단자 먼저 그가 되는 하다 미세가 하나 아투르가 이나 아투르가 그런 놈들에다 네 그간 지금들이 미주제들이 제리 아직 지금 두는 거야. 다들 먼저 이게 또 지금 시야를 가르치는 예수님의 문자를 투어 벌써 투어 내내 저와는 문제를 잡을지 어떻게 이게 되는 것이 무슨 말이에서 이나 제수니까 아니 예수님의 벌써 투어 내주지 내 뒤에 저라는 저와는 문제를 세야지.
So in the same commentary, Kenda Dharma's commentary, it's talking about the fact that this subject is considered to be extremely hidden. So what does it mean to say it's extremely hidden? It's not extremely hidden in the sense that we can see one another, right, directly, evident, and we are identified or recognized as being living in a rebirth which constitutes that type of higher status. So it's not an extremely hidden object in that those who are experiencing it cannot perceive it, right? We certainly can perceive that. Same is true of worldly gods. Among the worldly gods, they can mutually see one another. So the higher status of the worldly gods rebirth is not extremely hidden in that sense, right? So how specifically do we understand the meaning that this topic is a topic that epistemically has the status of being an extremely hidden object? So the commentator says, what is extremely hidden is that we don't have the ability to perceive if we are to be reborn in such a state which is above the lower realms, so a higher status in the sense that it is, what should I say, in terms of its quality, superior to the existence of the lower realms, so higher in status than that. What specifically about our environment will we be able to enjoy or find ourselves? And then, in particular, also in that environment, what sort of specifically, what sort of enjoyments, what sort of means of subsistence, and those elements that make our life more enjoyable, right? These are objects of enjoyment. We cannot determine that with any specificity. So that's the element of the nature of that as a goal, as a spiritual goal, that is beyond our ken, beyond our ability to be able to determine on this reason. Reason can't tell us with any specificity what our future rebirths will be. Whatever we can determine about it with any certainty is largely based on then what we can glean from canonical statements about the nature of karma.
다들 제가 tempat kami cuci. Tempat kami tempat itu sangat tempat satu tempat itu mungkin tempat dua tempat ini. Oke, sangat tempat itu kali satu handu itu nanti cuma kita untuk kami kita tidak. Sangat tempat itu. 한국이 기분한지 주는 세대들이 한국이 기분한지 주제를 돌아지야가 어제를 주는 시기 한국이 기분을 주제를 돌아지라 다시 한국이 tempat is.
So then moving to the next topic of establishing how the teaching is flawless. Then we also touched on this yesterday after the end of the day. So we started by saying what teaching here means, not any teaching, it means the Buddha's teaching, master with capital M. The teacher's teaching with a capital T, meaning the Buddha's teaching. So that has a kind of definition to it, and the definition includes the person for whom the teaching is intended, and the person for whom the teaching, the individuals for whom the teaching is intended are Tandekikibu. Tandekikibu means those persons who are seekers of their own liberation or salvation, if you like, in a more general sense. Bring about their spiritual, attain ultimate happiness. So, Tandekikibu, then Gyumed is, we said, was metaphorically comparable to the point of entry, or how one embarks on one gets on a boat, for instance, the harbor or the dock where one is able to physically climb onto the boat in order to travel somewhere. So in this case, the teaching is the point of entry in the sense of it is that subject matter which we can apply ourselves to in furtherance of that aim that we seek in life. And then it has two aspects to it. There is the scriptural form of the teaching, and then there is the I was calling cognitional that it means the sense of the internalizing the scriptural teaching in a way that you achieve the spiritual qualities that are associated with the scriptural teaching. Either one of those represent elements of the teaching, and so they are the object that represents the Buddha's teaching, either the scriptural form of teaching or a internalized cognitional form of teaching. That's going to be the definition of the Buddha's teaching.
다음에 다 단독이 기부세, 다 타로 들으세, 등에 타로 들으세요. 이게 이게 다 등에라 빨리 타로 들으시, 불러서 등에라 빨리 타로 들으시. 등에 등에서야 제일 봐. 이게 타로 단독이 걸로 야르바. 이게 단독으로 야리. 그 강의 때 그거 뭔가 아니 시다 처리가 자기 들었을지야 왜야지 나도 루트스를 봐. 이 두개들의 탄도 야래 사와 친구는 사와들의 탄도 답지 뭐 들이 답지 두개 아빠들의 탄도들이 두개의 야래 들의 탄도 밑에 쓰기 네 tanto mi senti che lei di punto di tavole di non di punto di tavole di dati ade tanto di così era c'era tutti di essere ana c'era tutti di essere di casual dire tanto che tanto di così tanto di dire taro dire due di taro si va perché sta tanto di così che si vede se nelle taro dove ci si è e tanto di but in the taro dove but dile tanto di così is tanto di
So in that definition or that description, that one element of description of defining qualities of what the Buddha's teachings are, is that phrase of being a person who is a seeker of liberation. Harva means liberation. Generally means at least liberation of nirvana. So moksha means that's freedom, liberation. But implicit in the notion of liberation is that you want to liberate yourself from something. And so the person who is, in order to be a seeker of liberation, implies you have not yet attained that, and that there is a condition which you seek freedom from. And that freedom from, what you seek freedom from is suffering. So then the nature of suffering, the way it's to be understood as the suffering that you seek freedom from, is not suffering in an unspecified way. So all living beings, including animals, have the innate instinct to flee from overt pain. We have it ingrained in us. Also, all beings, the avoidance of pain and the complementary impulse to find something that is alleviating that suffering. That's a basic impulse. That's not what we seek. That's not what is meant. That in that unqualified sense, in that sort of instinctive way, that's not what should be motivating us to seek liberation. Because that's typically only an impulse to seek freedom from the roughest kind of suffering, namely something that we view as painful, physically painful or mentally painful. So when we want to seek freedom from suffering, then that means a specific kind of suffering. So it means the suffering that is endured by our samsaric skandhas. That implies that we have some sense of our being as be comprised of the 5 skandhas that are subject more specifically to the suffering of conditioned existence. And suffering of conditioned existence is the most subtle kind of suffering, and the suffering that is pervasive throughout all of samsara and covers every kind of samsaric experience there is. It is defined as suffering that is created by karma and mental affliction, and which is ongoing in a way that over which we have no control. And an understanding of the unsatisfactoriness of samsaric existence, that's the suffering that we want to free ourselves from. So when we say a person who's seeking liberation, it means the person who is seeking liberation from that most subtle kind of suffering. That's part of what it means to be, that's who the teaching is meant for, and we need to understand that aspect of the describing phrase. So this phrase of being a person who is aspiring to free oneself from suffering, Tanda means a seeker of liberation. Mumukshi, if you want to understand, who wishes to free himself or herself. So we said that means to free themselves from suffering, and not just any kind of painful suffering, but the most subtle form of samsara. Another way of thinking of it is to free oneself from samsara. So then what does samsara mean? So that in this treatise, samsara is identified with the 5 impure skandhas themselves. That the contaminated skandhas are samsara, because they are what samsara means, a kind of a wandering or a repetitive action. So it is the 5 skandhas themselves which have, as one of their, the pure skandhas, have a quality. Cha means a quality of the 5 skandhas, which is that they are subject to repetitive rebirth. In some jara means to be joined to a future life. So as long as we're still subject to the mental afflictions, then each life that we experience, when it comes to an end, we will be forced to take birth again. We have no control over that. And that quality that's part of our being is really the essence of what samsara means. Samsara doesn't typically mean a location. It's not referring to a place, so to speak. Another word that is meant to convey the essential quality of samsara is that it is a state of bondage. So bondage is contrasted with liberation. Samsara is a state of bondage. And where does that bondage come from? It comes from the fact that we are uncontrollably shackled or bound by our own karma and mental affliction. We are unable to free ourselves from that condition. That's the real essence of samsara. according to some. So according to some, it is the five skandhas themselves. There are various different descriptions of exactly what samsara means. One is that it's the five skandhas. One is that it's an element of the five skandhas, that element of having to be reborn. And there are other views which say that there are that samsara refers to an agent or a subject, a person who is undergoing samsara, and then there is a locus where samsara takes place, and then there is the essence of samsara itself, which is being continually having to be reborn and experience those kinds of samsaric rebirths. So when we say the scriptural form of the teaching, then there's a word for scriptural for that is a particular term, lung. It has something to do with spiritual literature, in general sense. In this case, the scriptural refers to the Buddha's speech. There's a Sangyeki Sung. Sung is a vajana, Buddha's actual discourse, what he taught verbally. So that's the principal form of the scriptural teaching. But in connection with that, it's also understood to mean that certain then, which I say qualified, then masters, not Buddhas, but followers, have the ability to explicate, clarify the meaning of the Buddha's word. So sometimes the Buddha's word is, we as ordinary beings are not able to comprehend precisely what the intent of the Buddha's actual speech, how it's to be understood. And so those commentaries, which some great masters write, with the aim of explicating the meaning of the word of the Buddhas, or the true intent, how it's meant to be understood, are also included within, I guess in a secondary way, as part of the scriptural teaching.
That's actually Lungi Tempa Drisya. Lungi Tempa Drisya, the Kanadi, Sanjay, Sundila, Kosovachi, Sampachi, Sampachi. Ati yang tu Sanjay Sundila, Kosovachi, Tamba, the Guru Shindachi, Tujarach, the Guru Tujachi, Kosovachi, Chigi, I did Tamba, the Mujem, but Chigi. 아니 처가지였으나 처가지 상가지 단계기 지금 전달하지 또야지 처가지 지금 어디에 수의신이야 수의신이 시험이야 인디제가 맞제가서 롱기 때문에 이 초성부 수의시写的这里一心来想呀，怎么这个的？那你按这个用的看个怎么写？经济这个嘛这个，
嘛就是毛啊，
这个这个可能是嘛写的，这个。 Indeed, Jiva, Majiva, Tugajiva, that is indeed that the teaching thinking temper thing that said it. Mundi temper thing that the Kama shall not share. So they temper the around the teaching to it. Yet he is indeed Jiva, in the Jivas, Majiva, Tugajiva, and is, you know, and if Majiva, Mundi temper from the Yati. Chosen rank, chosen fusion in Javina, with empathy. Chosen fusion, Javet, one is Shanaya, and a number of Shanama, Jen, and finding with empathy was. That is because the church was here, choosing Imogen, so in the teaching, Java. And the Imogen in the one. That is it. That Mundi Temple said it, and you teach it in the Chebit. Nangi, doing something in Tubachia, Sambachia, Tubachia, in the chair. That's an easy. In a Tubachia, in the Nangu, to the Tubachia, and March. Yet in the Temple. That is any chip to
So there's a related term, a term that's related, and another term that's related to the teaching, right, as a noun. Right? And there is Zimba, which is a word which means literally to hold, to keep hold of. But it should be understood as to uphold, or even more loosely, to preserve. So the preservation of the teaching, Zimba, is carried out in a number of ways. So there's obviously that's a significant idea, something that is something to bear in mind about kind of our responsibility in relation to the teaching, which is to say we don't want the teaching to disappear, and teaching maintained or preserved by the actions of others. In particular, then listening. So key elements of the activity to preserve the teaching involve then specifically a pure motivation. So the motivation or the act is the act of learning and understanding and gaining an awareness of the meaning of the Buddha's scriptural teaching. But we can do it for the wrong reason, and have an impure motivation. So that does not constitute upholding the teaching. So if we have a pure motivation, proper motivation, and then the activity of listening to the Dharma and reflecting on the Dharma, the scriptural Dharma, then that constitutes an element of preserving the Dharma. That's an important activity. Beyond that, then the person who not only studies and learns the Dharma, but then with that knowledge, then teaches it to others, right? Explains it to others, verbally transmits it to others, then that's the essence of preserving the scriptural Dharma, by teaching to others the meaning of the scriptural Dharma that you yourself have determined meaning of. And that also is understood to be a form of generosity, the generosity of bestowing or giving the gift of the Dharma to others. And so that act also should not be thought of as being done in an improper way or an arbitrary way. It's that teaching the Dharma is meant to be done as an act that accomplishes the droidon. Droidon means the needs, the spiritual needs or aims of others. So then preaching or explaining the Dharma to others, in that sense, is upholding the scriptural Dharma, the essence of the most important element of upholding the scriptural So then there's a corresponding act of upholding the cognitional dharma. Upholding the cognitional dharma is accomplished by engaging in spiritual practice yourself and attaining, internalizing the meaning of the dharma by meditating on it, reflecting on it, and generating those spiritual qualities that are related to the dharma, the scriptural dharma. And that activity is upholding the cognitional form of the teaching. So this important term of upholding the dharma, and the essence of upholding the scriptural dharma is a verbal act. Speech, the speech in which you impart and share the dharma with others. The essence of the act of upholding the scriptural dharma is engaging in practice. Dhruva means practice. So in particular, I've given an example. When you carry out, you cultivate the instruction for developing bodhicitta, and you engage in that form of practice, or whether you engage in the instruction for how to cultivate and develop loving kindness, you are engaging that form of practice. Constitute, Tibetan word for it is nyamlen, right? So nyamlen and dhruva are similar. Dhruva is a more technical term, or more nyamlen is a more general term for adopting or cultivating or putting into effect the instruction. So that activity constitutes the essence of preserving or upholding the cognitional form of the teaching. It's keeping it alive by having individuals who possess knowledge of the dharma. So then another part of the definition was saying that the teaching is that that entity which constitutes the point of application, right? That entry point, not necessarily entry point, but that thing that one engages either through its scriptural form or through its cognitional form. So the act of engaging the Dharma has to have a starting point. That is called Gyumed door, the door by which one applies oneself, or the door by which one enters. So the door by which one enters the teaching is identified with the act of taking refuge. So the act of taking refuge is also a form of practicing the Dharma. And engaging in that practice is the form of practice by which one embarks upon the path. In general, in the case of the Mahayana, the entry point for the Mahayana is the development of bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is the entry point, typical, or the door by which one enters or engages into the Mahayana teaching, the Mahayana form of the teaching. So that word of engaging, or that object of engagement that relates to the teaching, and we can talk about what's the starting point for it. So obviously taking refuge is key to engaging the teaching. It says, Dembala Jupego. It says the door by which one enters the teaching. Again, the same subject that main subject we're talking about. And so then just again to reiterate, among the three types of activities, listening, contemplation, and meditation, listening, the act of listening to the Dharma, is generally associated with the scriptural Dharma. You're listening to verbal explanations about the Dharma, or the teaching in terms of the language that's used to express the teaching meaning. Once you engage in that, then the second and third principal types of spiritual activity, of reflection and meditation, then you're shifting from the scriptural aspect of it to the meaning that it encompasses, or the meaning that it conveys, and then you're focusing on that and trying to develop that internally by your own understanding, so that activity constitutes the practice of the conditional form of the teaching. So there is a very famous verse. It's contained in the Pramanavarttika, a collection of verses which the Buddha uttered, and 4 lines. First line says, not engaging in any non-virtuous or misconduct or like the word evil or and bad deed of any kind, avoiding any kind of bad deed. The second line is trying to perfect or cultivate as well as you can virtuous acts. Gyawa is virtuous acts. Means in a very well developed way. Rangi Sem, third line, Rangi Sem is your own mind. Yongsu Dul means then to gain overall or complete control, to subdue, to tame your mind. Then these 3 activities represent Sangye Demba Shavatata, Yuvatata. Sangye Demba Shavatata.
Sangye Demba
last time. Dini Sangye Demba Yin. Dini Sangye Demba Yin. This is the essence of the Buddha's teaching. This is the Buddha's teaching. So the verse itself is a form of scriptural teaching, right? It's the word of the Buddha. Then that particular verse is advice, right? Lakja, it is instruction. Do this. Do the act of avoiding any kind of misdeed or abandoning whatever misdeed you may have the impulse to engage. Also cultivate virtue. And as much as possible, if you engage in those 2 activities of avoiding non-virtue and cultivating virtue, they will have a positive effect on your mind. They will make your mind more peaceful. So the Dulwa means to be brought under control. Often in connection with that, we'll say the 2 words, Shishin Dulwa. Shishin Dulwa means that if the mind is actually brought under control, then that will provide you and endow you with a certain kind of peacefulness of mind. The mind will be more settled and therefore calm. So achieving that ability through that particular action, that represents the Buddhist. So those 3 activities that are mentioned in the first 3 lines of that verse are directing us to engage in the activities that constitute the essence of the cognitional form of Buddhism. And so then the practice of practicing the morality of abandoning non-virtuous deeds, that is a form of abandonment. So Dharma Ratna is the truth of cessation and truth of the path. So this is a form of abandonment, but not the abandonment of the truth of cessation. Nevertheless, it has a significance of being something that is in a way related to attaining that ultimate abandonment by abandoning non-virtuous. So we can understand those activities, those practices, as being a form of the cognitional teaching and engaging in the activity that serves to uphold the cognition as well.
That's Sanjay. The way in the city actually, Jampa, you need to be shared and do the Nejan road. Others can go Sanjay temple. Sanjay temple as yet.
The Buddha's teaching is vast in its what it encompasses, both scripturally and forms in terms of particular kinds of practice that we can employ. So,
scientific temple church scientific temple Jampa scientific temple church Lungit temple church scientific temple church scientific temple church Lungit temple Tote temple Nature
so in relation, so main subject here is the teaching, the teaching, what that is. And then another formulation would be, what are the acts, what activities should be carried out in relation to the teaching? As a follower, what activities should be engaged in? So the activities that should be carried out are, then the activity in relation to the scriptural teaching is essentially to learn it, to listen to it, so that we can learn it through its verbal aspect. Then all the efforts that we engage in to accomplish that represents the activity that we should do in relation to the scriptural aspect of the teaching. And then, of course, it's meant to be done properly. Sushi means that we do that with proper motivation, appropriate manner. And then the second one is that once we have gained knowledge, scriptural knowledge, we gain some understanding of the words of the Buddha and general idea of the meaning, then we have to engage in the activities of reflection and meditation on various subjects. And then that represents the activity that we carry out in relation to the cognitional form of the teaching. So when we are cultivating renunciation, that activity, that form of practice, is an activity that needs to be carried out in relation to teaching. Same thing for loving kindness, meditating on loving kindness, instruction on loving kindness, compassion, bodhicitta, so on. And those kinds of activities are the activities that are meant to be carried out in relation to the cognitional form.
that Gyumed
So then, having understood what the meaning of the teaching is, those two aspects, and that defining defining phrase, a phrase that incorporates all the elements that relate to the teaching and its purpose and aspects. Then the one activity that is being addressed as something that we ought to achieve is an understanding that the teaching is flawless. So to realize the unflawed nature of the teaching. So if the teaching has those two aspects of the scriptural teaching and cognitional teaching, so then there must be an unflawed, a way of determining how the scriptural teaching is unflawed, and a way of determining how the cognitional teaching is unflawed. So then, in a general way, we can think of the cognitional teaching as being unflawed in the sense using the distinction of the verb to express. So there's the future participle of express, which means that which is to be expressed. What is to be expressed is subject matter or meaning. And then the expressing agent is the words. So the words, or the verbal form of teaching, that's the scriptural teaching. So if the words of the scriptural teaching, if we investigate what the meaning that is expressed by the words of the scriptural teaching, and we determine that what the scriptural teaching says verbally correctly describes the nature of certain meanings, and that we verify those meanings to be true in the way that the scripture describes them, and that's one way to think of recognizing the scriptural teaching as being unflawed, being correct, being valid. So then in Dr. Ramba's text, he says something a little bit different in that he says the unflawed nature of the scriptural teaching involves investigating the scriptural teaching, what the words of the overall teaching incorporate, and examining whether something said at one time is how it compares to something said at a different time, and are those compatible, that they are not inconsistent in any way, that they're not contradictory in any way. So determining a certain overall consistency of the Buddha's teaching is how we verify the flawlessness of the scriptural teaching.
handle meaning margin. Maybe can do the business. You couple of chicken that would be a giant. You must have that child in it. Charging it that the gear. And the use the child did the two in the quality for having. I did the two in the music in the and the general. Sorry that you just an injury. I mean, an injury. Injury. English definition. They get the use of the target. The target is to target in English definition. English definition means that imagine the economy changing number changes. Yeah. Imagine the economy. Target to me. Pramanasiddhi, Gyumed, and can do the knowledge of the and it used to make an interview during the language together. Imagine Alamidi music like near the music and the idea music and the opportunity on the what. That is what it's telling. Music then to Jampa came to produce music like Gyumed person and the music needed and music of it and the music process every
So then there's also a similar activity of examining the teaching in relation to its cognitional form in order to determine whether it is flawed or not. That's something different. It's not about the Buddha's teaching. It's about our own practice and whether we're practicing correctly or not. So then, before we talk about that more specifically, there's a more general idea about the need to examine the Dharma, the teaching, before one applies oneself to it. For example, typically when we feel we have something that we want to obtain, an ordinary object, we want to buy something. So let's say we need a teacup, a particular teacup. We're short on teacups. So we go to a store and we pick up a teacup and we look at it, and then we examine it, and we determine whether it suits us, whether we like it, whether it's chipped or not, whether we like the shape or not. And so we often are rather discriminating in how we do that. Some shoppers are very discriminating shoppers. And so similar to that, we also ought to be just as discriminating in the way that we approach the Dharma that we undertake to practice, and then once we do practice also, as we are engaged in practice, we constantly need to sort of evaluate our own practice to see how our efforts measure up. So, for instance, if we take as a form of practice, particularly compassion. So we need to understand the meaning of compassion. The meaning of compassion has several components to it. Compassion is a mental quality that has a particular object that it is generated towards, and that is understood to be then suffering beings, a suffering being in some form, or all suffering beings, or specific suffering beings. That's its object. That's the mental object of compassion. Then, as a subjective mental state, it has a certain form to it, a certain aspect to it. It's Namba is that it has the kind of the emotional component of being desirous to alleviate or eliminate that suffering that is being perceived in some sentient being or group of sentient beings. And then we can also think of what is the function of compassion. How does compassion affect us? So that compassion, if it's strong enough, then it will kind of compel us. It will urge us to do what is necessary to bring about that emotional component. So what has to be done if we want, in fact, to alleviate the person's suffering? So all of those are the essential elements surrounding the quality of spiritual quality of compassion generally. So that's a kind of investigation to understand what compassion is in its totality, and then when we are trying to practice it, so then we need to we need to kind of at certain points, in order to practice true compassion as it is meant to be practiced, is that it should be impartial, it should be unbiased, it should be something that we are able to cultivate, or we're able to develop towards everyone, and among those, then we have those three categories of friend, stranger, or mutual person, enemy. And so the friend is the easiest category of being in which to develop compassion. So then the first kind of test is to see whether, in fact, we're able to develop the same intensity or the same sincerity of compassion that we have towards our friends, towards those people that we feel no particular connection with. That they're not a friend, they're not someone who's ever done anything beneficial to us. At the same time, they haven't done anything harmful to us. So what reason do we have to feel compassion for them, even though they're experiencing the same compassion that we naturally feel empathy for in our friends? So if we don't have the same degree of concern and love for those people we don't have any connection with, then that's also said our compassion, our cognitional form of compassion is flawed. So we need to refine it in such a way that the same degree of compassion can be generated towards those people who, in an objective way, we have no special connection with in terms of our history of that person. And then beyond that, obviously the enemy is the person that's the most difficult kind of object to develop compassion towards. And so we need to also cultivate the same quality towards them. And as long as we are not able to have this compassion, the true compassion that was defined was no matter what sentient being you direct your attention toward, recognizing that all sentient beings are subject to the same suffering, then one should make an unqualified determination to want to alleviate their suffering, regardless of your relationship with him or her. So being critical about our own way of actually being able to develop that represents examining whether our cognitional form of compassion is flawed or unflawed. So there's a little bit of time remaining, but Rinpoche thinks that he would like to hear the question, and then he'll give an answer in the afternoon. So
I have a quick question that might require a lot of
okay.
But Rinpoche said this morning that he believes that we can establish through normal inference or reasoning that by engaging in virtuous activities, we can, at least in general, create the conditions for a
Higher
higher.
rebirth.
So my question is, how is this something, what are the arguments? What is that reasoning
Okay.
that we can use for understanding that to be true?
자기 안에 가서 찌당 원토 원토 다 가서 그죠? 이 신부법 교육을 이 저승다 와도 맞아. 그게 중요한 말에 얘네 다 가서 그 대화나 원토 쌈직 어떻게 그래서 무슨 가서 Rinpoche Gueva. That the Rinpoche the Gueva the Jampa that the Kalsa that Suzum can Drupu can and they can just together. So the Taki and the Kalsa Pran to bring on that and Yamin the Kalsa church star that the Chetan Pran Mahomba gave one for something that Kalsa. Rooms that is rooms and the Taki can just in Chava can just
that's Chava thing.
not a piece of thing.
Really, children vision for the time you see. And you give me the children vision for the time. Children vision, Shinga.
But you can lose and drop.
Children vision for the time. Children vision that you be given this, you be given this. Children vision for the time you see. Depending on the
Sings and the book yesterday.
Shinga.
Tops up.
Tapsatina, the Choyari,
Room that was together, that he never managed together as well as
you give me this, and you guys but then the certain number that was students given to churches. And it's written wanted to do in it. And children number of us. Assign the age. But this is that and you that is very soon.
Room Maroon said the Mahoma the Nevada Tigris never room said so. Okay. So maybe I left out one element of that argument, which is critical, and which is to say that the thesis is that the person who possesses pure morality is capable. So the word capable is that's the idea that you cannot infer the result from the cause. The cause is the person who possesses morality, right? So, but that morality is a necessary condition, right? And therefore, because of that, you can say that person has a potential. Rung in Tibetan means capable, or even possible, or able to be reborn in a higher realm. The argument has that force to it. So, in response to your question in particular, what you use the instance of a field, farmer's field. A farmer's field that is properly irrigated or is watered or receives rain or whatever, moisture, and has enough warmth, and then is fertile. And if such a field exists, right, and then you plant a seed, a what do you call it, a seed which is not rotten, right, in that field, then that field or that seed has the capacity, or the erroneous has the capacity to grow, to germinate and produce its result. So that is the kind of the force of the argument is a person who possesses morality, therefore possesses the capacity that will bring a higher realm. The argument perhaps has that force to it.
That is the secret
So here, so part of that argument, another sort of what should I say, a corollary of that argument is that if you plant such a seed in such a field, the seed has the capacity to produce its crop. However, as long as some untoward consequences, let's use the example of no pigs come along and root up the field. That doesn't happen. It has the capacity to corrupt. That's not a certainty, not a foregone conclusion. In the same way, a person who practices morality, if there's no factor that mitigates against it, then that person has the capacity to be reborn as a higher realm rebirth. To be understood in that sense. So for example, the notion of karma, right? Karma as a cause, and the rebirth as a result. That is incorporated within the Four Noble Truths, right? That's an element of the Four Noble Truths. That's something that we can examine with reason. That's something that we can determine rationally as being reasonable, right? So the nature of the past, a cause, right? The karmic cause of pure morality, having engaged in that, creates the karmic causes, right? Which have the capacity, as being virtuous karmic causes, to produce a rebirth, a future rebirth that is in a higher state. So that's what that's saying is, in a general way, we have the ability to infer that through the more basic form of inferential reasoning. That does not require relying on the Buddha's instruction about karma. That's kind of the key part of it. That part of it we can infer.